If you're seeing this screen, welcome. The webinar will begin shortly. You are here for the Santa Clara Community Park Draft Master Plan Public Workshop. And we're watching here as participants are still joining pretty rapidly. So we're going to give everybody about a minute, and feel free to read through our information here on asking questions, slides, and materials. And we'll join you in a minute. Hello and welcome. Welcome to the Santa Clara Community Park Draft Master Plan. It looks like our attendance has slowly started curbing off, so people might continue to join, but we wanted to get started, and thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Mark Cosmos. I'm a landscape architect with the City of Eugene's Parks and Open Space Division. And I wanted to start this meeting by addressing the elephant in the room. That is, we're not in the same room together as we'd like to be. Our first workshop, held in February, had over 100 people in attendance, and we're hoping that this new format will attract at least that many, if not more. So let's start by describing tonight's meeting format. It's new to all of us, so I hope you'll bear with us as we work through any technical difficulties. Much of the workshop will be focused on providing information to you, but we also want to engage with you and answer your questions to the extent that we can. So we will be utilizing several functions in order to do that. The first is live polling. At a couple of points in tonight's workshop, we will offer opportunities for you to weigh in on what you're seeing. This provides us a quick snapshot in time of what people are thinking, and you'll be able to see that too, but it's not intended to replace our online survey. We'll have a practice poll question to allow everybody some practice time with this feature. We will also have a question and answer section in the workshop. There is a Q&A button on the Zoom toolbar that will allow you to type in a question. We will read the questions aloud and answer them live to the best of our ability. If there are questions we can't answer in real time, we will follow up later and post the answers on Engage Eugene on the project webpage. So feel free to type in your questions at any time during the presentation. And as always, we ask that all interactions are respectful. So as a reminder, the Engage Eugene website includes a section for the Santa Clara Community Park, where you can get information on past and future planned events, links, and current drawings. Within a day or so, a recording of tonight's presentation will be available as well. That website can be found at engage.eugene-or.gov/Santa Clara Park. Please take the survey. It's the best way we have to hear from you. And there's also a Spanish language version of the survey as well. For those of you who have called in today on your telephone or don't have access to the video or Q&A function, I'd like to give you a phone number now so that you can call during regular work hours to discuss the project. That would be my number, and that is 541-682-4902. I'll repeat that number again. It's 541-682-4902. You can also reach me by email at mkosmos@eugene-or.gov. So now I'd like to ask that our panelists turn on their videos. I'd like to introduce some of the panelists and partners that we have with us this evening. Let's make sure your sound is enabled. And what I'd like to do is just go through our list here and introduce everybody. And if I can ask you to wave and tell us what your role is in the project, that'd be great. First, myself, I'm already here. Kate Purley is our Santa Clara Community Organization partner, and she's on the middle in my screen. So good spot there. Hello, Kate. Carolyn Burke.
Hi, everyone.
Is our Parks Planning Manager. Emily Proudfoot.
Hey, everybody.
She is our Principal Landscape Architect. Philip Richardson. Jesse Carey Hobbs.
Everybody.
He's our Natural Areas Operations Supervisor. And Shelley Miller.
Hello.
She is our Ecologist and Ecological Services Supervisor. Lori Holtz. And Michelle Parkins.
Hello, everybody.
She is our volunteer coordinator. You may have seen her at the last workshop. Actually, a lot of our partners here were at our last workshop helping to facilitate tables. And lastly, our traffic engineer, Chris Henry, who's in the room, just in case we have some traffic related questions. And so let's just go from here and talk about tonight's agenda a little bit. So tonight's agenda is going to focus mainly on the draft master plan. But we know that some of you are joining us for the first time, so we'll start with a short recap of our first workshop discussions and then review a summary of our first survey results. Lastly, we'll focus on the draft master plan. We'll spend most of our time there, and then we'll answer questions at the end of the webinar. So, the recently adopted Parks and Recreation System Plan identified the need for developing a community center, pool, and community park in Santa Clara. While we would love to build all these things ASAP, funding is limited and the development of the Santa Clara Community Park is identified as the top priority. So, development of a pool and community center are likely to occur further out in the future, likely in the 15 to 20-year time frame. That said, we want to make sure that we identify a location for the community center and pool now. The master plan is meant to be a plan for the full build out of the park, to make sure that we're planning for the future, even if we can't afford everything right now. So today's plan will show all potential future amenities in the park, but it is still a draft. In the next 2 months, we will determine what can be included in the phase 1 plan. We'll look at budget, safety, maintenance, community input. All this is very important feedback so that we can identify those phase 1 priorities. The budget, the phase 1 construction budget is $4 million. And it's funded by the Parks and Recreation Bond Measure that was passed by voters in 2018. And it's also funded by the system development charges.
Hey, Mark, sorry to interrupt, but it might just be me, but your sound is a little quiet, and I wonder if you could adjust your mic or talk a little louder.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
How's that?
That's better.
Is that a little better?
A little.
Okay. What I'll try to do is speak a little bit louder.
Thank you.
I do have my microphone, I believe, cranked up all the way, and I think it's in a good spot, but thank you, Carolyn.
Yeah.
So let's talk about schedule. We're still on track to finish our planning efforts in the fall. We have one more workshop and survey to finalize the master plan and then identify our phase 1 improvements. Then we'll start working on construction documents and plan to begin construction in 2022 or 2023. Construction will likely take one full summer and fall construction season. Currently, our annexation of the 35-acre park is submitted and under review. Some of you may be wondering, and I'd like to be clear, that the city's annexation of the park property does not in any way require adjacent private properties to annex. You may have seen some additional activity in the park in the last couple of months. This is mostly removal of overgrown and invasive vegetation that supports our design process and investigation for the master plan. It also allows for better visual access into portions of the site to help reduce any potential illicit camping or other activities. So survey, we have a very detailed report of the survey results and the workshop feedback posted on Engage Eugene. And that was used to inform the master plan that we developed for the park. We think that we captured these elements in our design, but now let's just look at a few of these. Using the key below, which is here at the bottom, you can see we have green is very important, yellow somewhat important, purple not too important, and pink not at all important. The green, keep in mind, sometimes it's helpful when you're looking at these categories to group some of them together. For example, the yellow and the green. So this question is about fundamental park elements. We asked the question, please tell us how important each of these is to you and your household. The restroom and pedestrian access was most important, as well as furnishing amenities like bike racks, benches, and picnic tables. So let's assume those are a given for a minute. The next most important element is getting to the park on pedestrian sidewalks. This came up in our first workshop. So it's not a surprise that we're seeing it in the survey. It was identified as a safety concern. While all of these fundamental park elements are important, it's good to know, for example, that sidewalks along the road are valued higher than sidewalks on the interior of the park. And so it's more about helping us start creating some priorities and understanding. For land-based elements, the same question. We'd like to see how these elements are important to you and your household. So for these land elements, we noticed that the shade trees and natural area were the most important. If we combine the green and the yellow here, we still have a tie between orchard and community garden until you look at the not important categories. So our takeaway is that the amount of community garden should be close to that of an orchard space, but much less than that of the amount of natural area we develop. Context and participation are very important for interpreting surveys, which is why we bring draft plans to the community like we're doing tonight to get your feedback. Service level in this planning district shows that we don't have a community garden space or spray play, for example, so we do need to plan for it and then use your feedback when it comes to phasing priorities. Now it's time to combine our survey reading skills. For recreational elements, the playground and courts and trails were most important. So let's assume that playground, courts, and trails are a given for a minute and look at the next three categories: dog park, adult exercise equipment, and open irrigated lawn. All listed based on the green, very important category. So now if we include the yellow, somewhat important category, in addition to that, then these would actually reverse in their importance. But so far, these top 6 categories are between 50 and 80% important to the community. And then something happens here if you kind of look in a vertical axis at the spray play. Note how from here down, more than half of the participants see the remaining elements as not too important. Again, service level, or in this case, lack of spray play anywhere in Santa Clara is important for context. These results will help us in future phasing efforts. So let's jump to the bottom and for a minute of this page and talk about underrepresentation and how we use other tools outside of the survey and our workshops. So we had a write-in request early on for a skate park or skate spot from presumably a younger park user. So we added it to survey 1. And we know from experience that engagement from youth in surveys and workshops is a challenge, as well as engagement from the Latinx community. It's not surprising that a skate spot is low on the list for these reasons. So look for extra reporting on this topic as we're doing some targeted outreach for those underrepresented demographics to make sure that we're planning for a true community park. Last one, these priority questions are social-based elements. The community center and pool, which would be 10 to 15 years in the future, were very important, followed by picnic shelters and a flexible event space. So there was some discussion in the first workshop on including disaster and emergency preparedness and what that can be. now that we see how much interest there is, we might make this a focus group discussion for later, but not today. Stay tuned after survey number 2. Remember, the full survey results and workshop minutes are on Engage Eugene, and this is just a brief recap to help us with some context. So now I'm going to ask that one of our moderators, launch a warm-up poll. So there are no wrong answers here. We just want you to be comfortable with the online tool, and go ahead and at your own leisure answer the question, and then we'll show you how we're going to use this in the future in the workshop. That's pretty quick. So we're up to about 70% voted. And we're at about 87%. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to go ahead and end polling. It's possible not everybody wants to do that. And let's share our results. So here are the results from today's survey. What is your favorite berry? It looks like blueberry has got the win for 43% of our attendees here tonight. And we're going to use this a little bit later. So thank you for taking the time to learn how to use the tool. Inspiration. So now let's talk about the master plan and our inspiration for the park. Historically, this region has been agricultural, and this site has seen tree farms and orchards in the recent past. And we also have 3 distinct remnant creek beds running from south to north on the site. These are the remnant oxbows of the Willamette River and are sometimes referred to as the arms of the East Santa Clara waterway. Our design is based on an overlay of these 2 historical features of the park. We have blended both a remnant grid of trees in the more developed area of the park here with a more naturalistic design on the park's perimeter, especially where it intersects with the arms of the East Santa Clara waterway or old oxbows of the Willamette. The grid of trees is primarily on the north, and the more naturalistic plantings are on the edges of the park, both here and on the south portion of the park. And actually, now that I've said that, the creek beds, though dry most of the time, they're considered a protected resource. So we'll be showing a very light touch on the land as we get closer to these natural features. For easy reference, we're calling the 2 halves of our park, which is a 35-acre park, north and south. The park is bound by 3 streets that include River Loop 2, River Loop 1, and Wilkes Drive. It's surrounded by residential and public lands, including the Madison Middle School. The 4J School District is one of our partners in the park development. Parks and schools are often co-located, and they work really well together. For instance, Madison Middle School already has many amenities that we don't need to duplicate on the park site. This includes a synthetic turf athletic field, more informal athletic fields, foursquare, and multiple half courts for basketball. We recently installed out on the project site 2 temporary kiosks at the park, one in the north and one in the south, to help keep the neighbors informed about the design process. As you can see, most of the park amenities are located in the north part of the site. The future community center and pool are located in the south, along with the dog park. Parking will be included on both north and south halves of the park. We'll get into more details soon, but first wanted to provide this overview of the site. We have a 12-foot paved walkway connecting River Loop 2 and Wilkes Drive. It's the spine that connects all the park amenities together, and the connection between north and south will be at a bridge crossing here in the middle. If you visited the site recently, you might see where we have cleared out some invasive vegetation to help us find the best crossing spot. Along our street frontage, we are showing sidewalk and street tree planting to facilitate safe access to the park and allow for future connection to the Wilkes Drive bike path. Soft surface trails along the existing natural areas will be accompanied by additional trees planted in swaths and informal groupings to support the natural character of the open space and be in harmony with the community values and informal in character, in the park's character. As mentioned earlier, the natural areas of the park are focused on the existing drainage ways and park edges, and these areas can be enhanced by removing invasive vegetation and planting additional native species. These areas would not be irrigated, they would be less frequently mowed, and have an overall more natural character than the rest of the site. The community park will include lighting. These would be pedestrian scale light poles, not too tall, and they would be shielded to limit glare into adjoining properties and into the night sky. This is our draft enlargement of the north site master plan. It shows a little more detail and explores adjacent relationships between park elements. I'd like to walk you through each one of these zones now, starting with the schoolhouse at the north end of the site, here at the top of your screen. The city has been having conversations with the Santa Clara Community Organizations to look into the feasibility of preserving the former schoolhouse for community use. At this time, I'd like to introduce Kate Purley, the chair of the SCCO, to share a little background information on the schoolhouse and how it might be used in the future.
Hi, neighbors. First, I just want to say thanks so much for tuning in and caring enough to participate in the planning of this park. So as some of you may know, the building there at 990 River Loop 2 was a one-room schoolhouse that was built there in 1901. And many of our elder neighbors went to elementary school there. It was used until the brick and mortar Santa Clara Elementary School that you may have been familiar with at Hunsaker and River Road was built in 1931. And we, the Santa Clara Community Organization, are hoping to enter into an agreement with the city of Eugene to take ownership of the building itself and rehabilitate it with volunteer effort and donated materials and recreate it in its former glory as a one-room gathering space. If you've lived in Santa Clara for any length of time, you know that we don't have any public place to meet, and we have been graciously hosted by our schools, our granges, our churches, our firehouses, and our water board building in the last 24 years that I've been involved with our community organization. And we're so grateful to them for partnering with us to give us space to meet, but it would be a great step up for our community to be able to have a place of our own to call home. So the idea would be to use some of the 150-year-old fir trees that Lane County graciously donated to us for use for neighborhood improvement. And our friends at Eugene Wholesale Nursery have been kind enough to let us store the logs at their site. And we have neighbors who are actively milling that lumber, and we'd be able to use that 150-year-old lumber to rehabilitate this 120-year-old school building for use as a community center or community space until such time as a larger community building is built by the city of Eugene. So I'd like to also extend thanks to the city of Eugene for their willingness to consider this kind of partnership with us. So the short story is we'd like to preserve part of our past and rehabilitate it for use in our present and for our near future. Thanks a lot. And if you're interested in lending your support to this project, you can contact us at the website santaclaracommunity.org to get our information and let us know you want to join in. Thanks, Mark.
Awesome. Thank you, Kate. And let's continue on with our tour. So to the south of the schoolhouse is a community garden with space for approximately 50 plots. The community garden would be serviced by a small parking lot immediately adjacent to the east of the schoolhouse. The food production theme would then continue in this area with a fruit orchard surrounding the schoolhouse. And the flexible event plaza near the parking lot is sized to accommodate about 10 to 15 pop-up booths for community events. It's adjacent to the restroom building. And you'll note that there's an east-west connection from between the two parking lots. It's oversized for maintenance and event use. So should food trucks or maintenance be needed, this connection makes it easy to service the park without interrupting the major pedestrian areas to the south. The play area is centrally located and large enough to have a separate zone for older and younger kids, and it's separated by a sand play feature. It is shown about twice the size of the one at Emerald Community Park, just as a point of reference. It has ample seating and shade on its perimeter, both in formal bench locations, seat walls, and a shaded lawn space here just south of the toddler zone. There is clear, unobstructed visibility from the play area to the shelters, as well as to the restroom building, and seating areas all around for keeping an eye on children. The irrigated lawn is about 3 acres in size. If you're familiar with Emerald Park again, the open irrigated lawn there is about 1 acre, or 1/3 the size of what we are showing here. You will note that there are 2 large shelters shown on the master plan. These are rentable group shelters and are slightly larger than the ones you might find at Emerald Park for scale comparison. The central location is close to the restrooms and play area, but separate enough to allow for group gathering with some relatively close parking. Now, do you see the small feature here called Spray Play? This feature can serve multiple purposes as a play feature for water play, or as a stage for community events. Its location right here is like an elbow between the flexible event space to the north and the Great Lawn. It can serve as a stage facing either space for smaller functions or for bigger lawn event functions. The courts area includes a full court basketball court and up to 4 pickleball courts. A small shelter for smaller friends and family gatherings is located right close to those. And these features are also situated very close to the Madison Middle School, where we're also proposing a small gate and paved connection here to the 4J sidewalk. So this is an enlargement of the draft master plan for the south end of the park, shown at full build out. The community center and pool are not really designed yet, so these images are a placeholder for now. And the dog park is proposed to be on the north side of that future community center and pool. However, because it will be quite some time before the community center and pool are constructed, the dog park may work better closer to the street with parking provided. Ideally, the interim dog park will be about 3 acres, fenced, and have a separate big and little dog area. So that covers everything we wanted to share about the draft master plan. And now I think what we're going to do is ask a couple of questions from you to hear what you think. And we're going to go ahead and launch poll number 2. And there are a handful of questions in these, so we're going to allow some time to try and get to 100% attendance as close as we can. And then we're going to share our results and talk about that a little bit. So Carolyn, if you wouldn't mind launching poll number 2. So the first question here is, what are you most looking forward to doing at Santa Clara Community Park? The second question, what do you think of the balance of developed park versus natural area? And the third is, what park amenity is most important to you? We're getting some great participation here, and it looks like we're at about 60%. So we'll just wait a little bit longer. give everybody a chance to weigh in. And as we're getting close to the end here, we're getting almost full attendance. I'm going to go ahead and end the polling now, and we'll share those results. So let's talk about these for a little bit. What are you looking forward to doing at Santa Clara Community Park? Enjoying nature. So not surprising, given the feedback that we heard at the first workshop and first survey. And so if you take a look at the plans, you know, we are including a natural area and trails that really circle the perimeter of the north portion of the park, as well as make a connection down here to the south. So you can see this dashed line, what's labeled as a soft surface trail, really does a loop around both park sites. There's even a spot here that may be developed as a second crossing because there is a little zone in here next to the bridge where we can kind of tuck in. So there are some opportunities for doing multiple loops there and enjoying nature. Right now, if you were to go out there, the area that's a big open field is about half of this northern site. So if you're familiar with walking the informal cow path, as it were, loop that's out there right now, this is about the size. So you get a sense of scale. It's going to be quite a lot more walking area out there. And now next question is, what do you think of the balance of developed park versus natural area? So developed park is some of these formal elements like a playground, an irrigated lawn, the community garden, the flexible event plaza, and then the natural being these perimeter zones on both north and south sites. And it looks like 58% of participants think it's just right. So that's good. That's good feedback. And that's partly why we do this, is so that we make sure we're gauging our community input appropriately. And lastly, what park amenity is most important to you? So out of today's group, and let me just read through all the possibilities. We have a children's play area. We have an irrigated lawn, community garden orchard, dog park, court sports, picnic shelters and event space, and other. So other, we expect to see, we'll probably see some questions coming up during the Q&A session where people might start suggesting something that we didn't put on here for the pop-up poll survey. And so picnic shelters and event space, and that's great. You know, that's that lets us know that people do want to get a little bit of shade. We did hear a lot about that, more trees for shade. So I could see how using a meeting space like this could be super fun and appropriate, as well as the flexible event space, which we heard as well. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing these results. And I think what we're going to do now is start taking some of those Q&A questions. And just a reminder, this poll is really meant to be just a quick snapshot of your thoughts. We really do want to hear more from you, and we encourage you to take the full survey where there are more options and opportunities to express yourself. So we'd like to address your questions now. We're going to leave this image of the draft master plan up during the Q&A for reference. If you haven't already, please click on the Q&A button in the toolbar and type in your question. We will read the questions aloud and answer them live to the best of our ability. And if there are questions that we can't answer in real time, then we'll follow up later and we'll post the answers on Engage Eugene on the project webpage.
Okay, we've got a number of questions coming in. The first one is for you, Mark. How many people participated in the first survey?
Okay, it was over 100. My memory is not always that great, but I want to say it was 126.
I actually have that, Mark. It was 148, and our current survey is at 153, so we've surpassed it already.
Oh, Wow. And the survey is going to be open through September 7th. And actually, I think we're already talking about extending that potentially in order to allow a little bit of time for the targeted community outreach for the underrepresented, both the Latinx community and the youth.
Okay, the second question I think is for Kate. Will the schoolhouse be available for rental?
There we go. That would be, I think, part of what we're looking at. To be able to continue to do maintenance and upkeep and pay the bills, we would need to be able to rent it out for functions to people in our community who are looking to host something. So yeah, that's the hope.
Thanks, Kate. The next question is, how much of the budget would potentially be going towards the schoolhouse project? I think actually I can answer that one. At this point, all of the $4 million is slated for park amenities, and the city's portion of that budget is not going towards the schoolhouse project. So that is completely an effort of the Santa Clara Community Organization at this time. The next question. In conversations with adults at Aubrey Park and Aubrey Park Elementary, I heard unsolicited comments that there isn't much for teenagers. And contrary to the survey, they mentioned skateboard area. Mark, do you want to answer this?
Sure.
Or address this?
Sure. In fact, we were just talking about that last week. So one of our partners in this design effort is Cojito, and they do a lot of public outreach and are very experienced, especially in the Santa Clara and River Road area. And in talking to Julie last week, she actually mentioned to me that she was doing another survey for River Road, and somebody approached and asked about our park and said, well, hey, what about skate parks? Or skate spot, is that going to happen here? And that's precisely the kind of underrepresented outreach that, that we need to get other ways. And so there are ways for doing that. There are metrics, there are ways to report it. And so the poll results may not always reflect that. So we don't want to go strictly by that. I think if you recall, I think it was the third slide on poll examples, skate spot was actually very low on the list. And in part, it's because it's difficult to get our teenagers to do much of anything. I can say that. I used to have teenagers that were in that condition, and they'll grow out of it, don't worry.
Okay, so I think Chris Henry maybe and Mark could both address this next one. With the upcoming LTD bus transfer station and this new park, what did the traffic study show as the impact to the community? Santa Clara is already becoming overcrowded.
Chris Henry, City of Eugene traffic engineer. I'm not directly familiar with the transportation study for the Santa Clara station that Lane Transit District is building. Although I can say that people that ride the bus are not driving cars, typically, in order to get on the bus. So having good access to transit helps reduce traffic on the local streets.
Okay. And, also, I think what we've heard and been learning along the way, and talking about traffic is not uncommon for park design. Typically, and in fact, for this particular project, we looked at the future community center as most appropriate along Wilkes Drive. If you think about it, the Madison Middle School is located there. And so from a bigger picture transportation planning standpoint, we look at things like the road, Wilkes Drive, and is that, designed for that type of school and use, and also for the future community center and pool. The difficult part, and the part where we may need to do a little bit more digging in order to answer your questions, they might not be able to be fully answered here is there are some jurisdictional concerns. So as a city organization, we design and plan and do our own traffic studies within our streets. However, there's some mixed jurisdiction here, and some of these are county roads. So we do have partners who do the same type of work and have the roles that we have here, that we work with closely, where there are some of these overlaps to talk about those issues and try and address them, so that we can have a safe and exciting park for everybody.
Thank you, Mark. Let's see. Next question, can you do a combo of tennis and pickleball? And any talks about volleyball nets?
Can we? Certainly we can do anything. Tennis courts, actually to hear that tennis courts are coming up as a suggestion is a little bit of a surprise, because we've actually seen a decline in tennis courts use. In fact, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Carolyn, I think it's Westmoreland Park that had some older tennis courts that were converted to pickleball because they weren't being used a whole lot. And I know there are a few differences there too. You know, from a pickleball standpoint, the court size is about half. From a court sort of a function standpoint, tennis courts are pretty big. They do tend to crack a lot. They have a really high maintenance regime and cost to them. So there would really have to be a demonstrated use to have something like that. So if it's a site that already has tennis courts, maybe we would consider the conversion. But this would be the first time that we've heard of tennis as a request in this area. Does that answer the question, or did I miss a piece of it?
I have a quick addition on this
Please.
one. We've done a little bit we've done, I think, one combination court just to try it out in Slavin Park, which is in the Whitaker neighborhood. And so that might be a place where, you know, we could see, you know, how that's working, and if, you know, what the kind of combination of uses, you know, if that's a good thing or if it's kind of funky, or, you know, kind of how it works. I've mostly just heard positive things about the courts in general, that people are just using them. So, and in that case, we have to put in people have to bring their own sort of temporary nets or whatever. So there's some programmatic things about it, but we have a little bit of precedent for that.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Emily and Mark. Wow, guys, we have 33 questions here, so we're going to keep moving through here. How will the transient population be addressed? Let's see. Mark, do you want to start?
I will start. Boy, that's always a difficult question. I think some of the concerns, you know, that we heard in our first workshop were, hey, we have folks out here doing donuts in the park. I'll relate this to transient as well. And we have this going on, and it's, you know, it's part of that has to do with the fact that, you know, right now the park is going through an annexation process. So once it is annexed and part of the city, then Eugene Police Department has this on their maps and on their radar, and if there's an issue at the park, they can address it. Right now, if that were to happen, if there was a transient camp at the park, there's, I believe, one sheriff in the area that would handle that. And so whether or not that person is being pulled in other directions for other issues, it becomes the point, is that it's very difficult for an organization that's stretched very thin like that across a large area to handle it. But once it's in our system, once it's part of our park, we are as vested in taking care of it and controlling and reporting on issues to the best that we can. So we're looking forward to, and the annexation process is actually underway. So we hope to have that done before we even break ground on the park.
Can I add a little more to that, Carolyn?
Please.
So, you know, with the parks bond measure and levy, we were able to dedicate City of Eugene police officers to parks. So we also have a park ambassador program. And so, you know, a lot of that right now, a lot of their work right now is around homeless camping. It's been a very heavy summer for that. And so we're fully aware of the issues in our parks, I think probably more than we've ever been. And I think, you know, if they were to get a call or a report on Park Watch, they would come out, they would post the camp, they have to give the person 24 hours to vacate. And then if you need the additional help of Eugene Police, we do have our park, dedicated park police officers that can help. So it wouldn't be as responsive, say, as a 911 call potentially if once the property is annexed, but it's the best tool we have as a parks agency to help keep parks safe from just about any standpoint. So if someone has a dog off leash and they're not supposed to, and it's a mean dog, they're out there letting them know. If there's someone who's camping out there, they're posting the camp. If they need assistance because that person actually has a mental illness or is a scary, is not doing well and could potentially harm another person, they're bringing in cahoots or EPD. So we have that, less on a 911 basis, but it is a much improved resource since we passed the levy, since the community passed the levy back in 2018. So it's better than it was.
Thank you, Emily and Mark. The next question, why is River Road Parks and Rec not included as part of a master plan? I think I'll try to address that one a little bit, although I'm not exactly sure from what angle the question is being asked. It's part of the difficulty of not having give and take here. But in general, I would say that we are outside of the River Road Park District here. And so this recognizing that the city of Eugene should be providing some services out here. This is, within the city's jurisdiction. I know that Emerald Park is really valued, as are all the services of the River Road Parks and Rec District. And I don't know if maybe the question is related to maybe could there be some opportunity for them to manage this site or what? I think that those are kind of ongoing conversations about the future of the park district and how the city meshes with it. And there's just a lot of unknowns at this time. But the city, recognizes our responsibility to provide services here as well. So that's what we're doing with this park. Okay, so.
Thank you, Carolyn.
Sure, thanks. Next question, is there any chance that the interim dog park location could be the actual location so as to provide a buffer between the very busy future community center pool and parking lot? Mark?
Sure. We talked about using the actual location as the interim. And there are a couple things that we've been on the fence about from a concern standpoint. So right now, I think what folks do who are in the neighborhood, they walk to a dog park. And that can certainly happen anywhere. But as a developed dog park where we have a separate big and little dog area, we do expect that there will be some people that are driving there. And so what will happen is they're going to drive to the dog park location, and in order to get close to that park, they're going to want to ideally, I think, use this Wilkes Drive area. So we're exploring the options of doing either some on-street parking lot or a small parking lot, with the understanding that within a city context and from a stormwater perspective, as we start doing that, we also have to provide the stormwater mitigation from the parking lot runoff. We have to pay for that improvement, for the pavement, for the grading, for that as part of the park, as well as the actual dog park itself. So it's actually a little bit more difficult to start thinking about doing that along Wilkes Road, but if we do it up in the future dog park area, it's going to be really hard for us to get a road all the way in there without providing a lot of our current $4 million budget towards park features. And so, we know eventually the community center and pool will come online, and it will have a budget to do the parking lot, to do the pool, and to do all the landscape around it, provide shade trees. Ideally, when that goes in, that's when the future dog park moves up towards the north.
Thank you. Next question. Casual feedback from multiple teenagers agrees with the above comment that a skate park, skate elements, BMX elements are desirable. I think we've touched on this. Mark has talked about that, so we'll keep moving here. But basically, we are doing additional outreach to youth in the neighborhood, and we are going to make sure that those voices are heard.
And actually, let me add to that, Carolyn, as well.
Yep.
You know, we word our questions to say, how important is this to you and your household? But it doesn't mean that every person in the household can vote. If you have an email address, you can log on to Engage Eugene. You can take the survey yourself. I would encourage, you know, if you have a group and you're on this call right now and you submitted those comments, that's wonderful. But please do take the survey. We'd love to hear from you.
Next question. What is your ETA for sidewalks on Wilkes Drive? And maybe Chris can address this one, and then Mark. I don't know.
Actually, I think I'll start with this one, Chris, and then maybe you can just infill for me if it's okay, because I had talked about this early on with Reed Dunbar. So Reed is one of our transportation planners, and he informed us that right now we're working on a bike connection that's going to come from the south here, if you see the cursor moving, in order to get to Wilkes Drive. And so he said, you know, when you're doing this, if you're thinking about that future park, just remember that's going to come in there. So it would be great if you could start thinking about what that bicycle connectivity is. And
That's
overall.
That's a connection from Beaver Street to the north. It connects from Beaver Street and Hunziker to the north to Wilkes is what that plan is.
Okay. And that's I don't know how many years out that is, but that's sort of the next one that's in the works. Is that correct? Okay, so, you know, knowing that and really thinking long-term and big picture, we know that right now the bike lane comes here and it terminates at this driveway at the Madison Middle School, and then it stops. And so, you know, we showed on a couple of these slides a suggestion of extension of the streetscape across. That's likely to happen when there are major improvements up here. So on Wilkes Drive, certainly what's directly across from the park property itself, that's under our control in parks and open space planning. And then we can start talking to and working with our partners, whether it's in the county or transportation, and say, hey, we have this park coming online. You know, how can we best manage our resources and think about doing this in a way so we can provide the best service to the community, knowing that the community is really looking for that sidewalk connection.
Thank you, Mark and Chris. I'd like to see more info on the community center, maybe on the Engage Eugene site. Size, number of rooms, kitchen, seniors, number of lanes, hot tubs, the whole thing. What's in it, what's not included. You know, we could post some of that information. I'll just answer this one too. We have we did some system planning earlier this year and last year, a couple of years ago actually, to identify what the needs were. And we did make some assumptions about what would be in that community center. It was very high level, but it would be a community center and a pool. I don't think it got quite into the detail that you might be looking for here. And of course, it will change as we get closer and closer to actually designing the community center and building it and budget and everything like that. But we do have some kind of general assumptions about what would be included. I don't know those off the top of my head, but it's a good suggestion to add it to the website. So we'll do that. Next question. Why is the playground so far from the community center? Wouldn't one of those future uses of said community center be to have camps and possibly after-school care of young children? This design makes that seem difficult. Mark?
Well, yes, that's a very good and logical observation. Not necessarily stumped, but you know, when we started our planning process, we looked at a very high level at many of these things, and we looked at what it would take to, for example, include all of these elements on either just the north or the south, and what that meant. And what that meant was that a lot of these features ended up being almost insignificant, or it would have to start kicking one or two things out. And then we started playing with the balance of, well, what is the one thing that maybe makes sense to move out there? And we considered, we considered community garden, we considered dog park. We talked about parking and how much parking to provide now versus, relying on the future parking here. And it really comes down to what the needs are. And our first priority needs for phase one are for the park and the park features. And ideally, if we were designing and building the entire master plan all at once, I think that would be a big contender, is to look at locating the playground near that future community center and pool. However, given what we have and our space constraints, I don't think we can currently accommodate that playground without really compromising both what we're showing as a placeholder footprint right now, as well as providing a connectivity between that element and what we have on the north. Playgrounds really are paired with restroom building, and they're paired with parking. And so as we start thinking, if you were to just kind of think out of the box and say, well, let's just move it. If we were to move that playground now to the community center, now we're going to be creating and paying for parking down on the south, and providing a restroom building on the south end as well, maybe on the north end. And now all of a sudden we're probably going to start breaking our $4 million budget and not being able to provide all those services. So it certainly is a balance. We do use our judgment for that. It is a very good comment, and it does not go unnoticed. So thank you for saying that.
And Mark, I just want to pipe in here that certainly sometimes community centers will add a kind of small play area kind of within the footprint of their area. So it's possible that that could be added, and also just field trips from the community center to the playground. I don't think we have anyone on from recreation right now, but I am going to move us along because we still have over 30 questions. And
can I add one tiny thing, Carolyn?
Yes,
please.
I'm sorry. I wanted to say that with COVID, the way that recreation summer camps have been able to operate is that they're mostly operating outside. And so they're moving to these really big spacious areas within the park settings that they're set in and using those areas to its full extent. So I think it's an easy, it's a quick walk over to the field and the playground, and they could run programs there all day. But, they've really adapted beautifully. So I think it would work.
Okay, next question for Mark. Will any of the existing fruit trees be cut?
Yes, some of the existing fruit trees will be cut. There are some that are currently shown about where the playground is. These are the oldest group of fruit trees. In fact, we had an expert come out from the extension service and take a look at them and say, given their age and lack of maintenance over time, they're really past the point where we can salvage and do something. Now, there are a smaller grouping of fruit trees, and they're located right about here, just kind of on the edge of that irrigated lawn. So remember, this is a draft master plan, but when I look at that and I look at the size of those, and they're anywhere from a 1 to 2 inch caliper, that handful of trees, which is about maybe on the order of 6 to 10, could be transplanted. Also, given their size, we could actually start something new. We can even start something new before the rest of the park goes in, and get some growth out of that. Wouldn't take a little bit of, don't get too excited. I don't have my shovel ready, but there are ways we can start planning for, getting something like that done and established. And yes, we do know that there's interest in preserving those fruit trees. In fact, that's one of the reasons why we included a fruit tree orchard up here in the north. And, if we do have a breakout and a focus group at some point, it's going to be important that we have some kind of a volunteer use agreement with a group that wants to handle and protect that resource and share it with the community, share those pruning ideas on how to take care of your trees. Because from a parks perspective, fruit trees are very difficult for us to maintain and take care for in a park. So having that located here with the schoolhouse and community garden and the center, this real grassroots effort, makes a lot of sense to us, because I think we're going to have the right people and the right minds to take care of that. Hopefully I answered that, Carolyn, although I think I went on a tangent a little bit there.
Let's see, we have another question here about the skate park. There seems to be adequate space here to build something, possibly with closer proximity to Madison in the undeveloped natural area. And so we've got another question here and comments about looking at skate park facilities, and I think we've addressed that we're gonna keep that door open and see what kind of interest there is from the youth in the neighborhood, and so more to come on that.
And you're probably right about the location. This is kind of where we were first looking at that.
Yeah.
So there's room, but again.
So what is your traffic calming planning? We experience lots of high-speed drivers on Wilkes Drive and night traffic with noise, etc. in Madison Middle School and on Wilkes and River Loop 2.
Okay, so we learned some things with every project, and actually very recently on our last one, we did learn that there are some steps that we can take within for city streets and rights of way. This again is a jurisdictional question because it is a county road. And when it comes to planning for parks, when we annex and have this property, let's look here, for example, on the south end, we have the ability to take and look at to the edge of the road, if this were, for example, on a all city property, take a look at that to the right of way and start thinking about traffic calming here on the intersection or at the street crossing. Same thing here on the north end. Once we go beyond that park property, then it becomes a conversation with our transportation engineers and our traffic engineers, because they're the ones who are best versed in understanding what the overall traffic is, what the existing numbers are and what they mean, and then how to compare that with the speeds and make recommendations from that standpoint.
And more specifically, Mark, that's with Lane County.
Yes.
Because they're the road authority and have jurisdiction over both River Loop 2 and Wilkes Drive.
That's correct.
It's not a city street, or we cannot install traffic calming on a county road.
Good point. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris. Good clarification. So we'll have to be working with the county on that. Okay, will the soft paths include exercise spots such as those along Prees Trail?
They certainly can. I don't believe we have them shown or included, but I do believe that there was some interest in the survey for that. So I think that's something that we would look at including in some of our prioritization studies.
Okay, the next question is, have you decided on the name of the park? I think I can probably address that one. You know, the official name of this park is Santa Clara Community Park, and we haven't had any ideas of changing that. We really do like our park names to be evocative of that area and the neighborhood that it's in. So Santa Clara Community Park is certainly descriptive. But we'll be interested in hearing if there are strong feelings that that's not appropriate. But for now, we're thinking that it would stay Santa Clara Community Park. Okay. Will there be park hours? And if so, how will they be enforced?
Yes, there will be park hours and park rules the way there are in all of the City of Eugene's parks. And enforcement is through our two police officers that are dedicated just to our parks. And our ambassadors and I'm sorry, I could use a little help here, Carolyn.
I can help, maybe.
Go for it, Emily.
A little. Yeah, we do have park hours. Parks close at 11, and I think they open at 6. And you know, we've tended to kind of trust that people will you know, observe those hours. If we've had troubles with that, we tend to, basically, you know, at Baker Park, we've done this at a few of our other sites that we've had some issues with, but we have a big gate that we close at 11. And we could add that to the route of, you know, a security company that does that for us. So yeah, any of the parking areas that, you know, were proving to be problematic, we would probably just gate them closed.
Thank you. Next question. This is maybe for Alyssa or Mark. What % of the first survey respondents were citizens of Eugene? I know that we did get some location information from respondents, and I think they were all from Eugene, but can you clarify that, Mark or Alyssa?
Hi, yeah, I can jump in on this one. Our first survey had almost 15% identified as they do not live in Eugene.
Ah.
And our current survey has about the same percentage currently.
And actually, if you remember, Santa Clara is actually a little bit of a patchwork of annexed
Right.
and unannexed properties. So I think that 15% is probably accounted for in that. And, you know, we are thinking of this as a region Santa Clara, we're not strictly looking at the patchwork pieces that are annexed. This is for everybody in the community.
Thank you. Is this a forum for brainstorming fundraising ideas? The planning committee, I mean. I'm wondering if this is related to the schoolhouse. I think as Kate said in her introduction about the schoolhouse project, if you're interested in helping with ideas for that, or in general, get a hold of the Santa Clara Community Organization. That is the primary fundraising effort, I think, underway at this time. What do the additional park amenities in phase 2 include?
So, right, we don't have our phase 1 priorities identified or pre-scripted at this point in time. That's why the survey is out. That's why we're having this workshop, because we'd like to hear from everybody what their priorities and desires are in the park. We certainly have some service needs within the Santa Clara community that we would need to provide from a service perspective. That we'll be including, but the balance of what is in phase 1 versus what is in phase 2 isn't predetermined at this point.
And will there be accommodation for people with mobility problems?
Absolutely.
Do you want to elaborate?
Well, you know, the site, I guess, I like going kind of from when you arrive in the park and walk through, you know, in the parking area, these are our 10 vehicle bays. And so we have our ADA parking currently shown here on the far east end. And so that provides basically the immediate and closest access to the heart of the developed park area. So this is all paved hardscape within here. This is actually a grove of trees and tree grates. So this is all basically one big plaza space that can be used as a, you know, bigger flexible event space. But all of this is designed as a paved hardscape, including all the way around the playground area, including through the playground area, as well as this path, which is a hardscape path that crosses the bridge out to the future community center. Now, you know, as we get to this zone here, I think we would like to prioritize and keep the bridge available early on in the project so that we can keep a connection between the two pieces of the park, especially if we're talking dog park. But hardscape is really our way to make the ADA accommodated. The playground, we would love to do an inclusive playground that's accessible to all. And we try to do that in a lot of our park designs, including some older parks. But as we do these new ones, that's certainly our best opportunity to look at what those inclusive play ideas are. In fact, we had one write-in, which is a really cool one. Somebody even sent us a picture from a neighboring park. I think it was up in Portland or maybe Seattle, with a accessible zip line for young kids. They can actually in this case, wheel up onto a ramp and take the zip line down and across. And it's a standard piece of play equipment that basically can be accommodated in a playground that's this size. So we are looking at this as a larger size playground so that we can do those kinds of things.
Thanks, Mark.
You bet.
Approximately when will the dog park be completed?
Again, we don't have, we don't have a definitive answer on what is in the phase 1 plan at this point in time, but we would certainly like to include whether it's the interim dog park or the final dog park in some configuration with that construction in phase 1. But again, it's a balance with our phase 1 budget.
Let's see, why so quick to discard the skate park and or bike pump track ideas? Online surveys of this type are heavily biased towards older folks with internet access and more time and interest in meddling with community affairs, not necessarily those people who are most interested in more active park use activities. So we have here another person interested in really reaching out beyond the survey and finding out what youth and others who might be interested in these ideas are interested in. And unless Mark has anything else to add, I just want to assure people that these ideas aren't off the table at this time. We're really going to be digging deeper into the community through some focused activities and meetings to try to get more feedback from youth and hear what is most important to them.
Well answered. Thank you, Carolyn.
Okay. This plan will increase traffic to the area. What will be done to increase bicycle traffic and decrease car traffic? I think Chris provided some good information earlier, and Mark, about the intended bike path that would connect Santa Clara Community Park to the south, to the Beaver Hunsaker area. And I think we're all really excited about the possibility of that, creating that north-south bicycle access through this neighborhood. I think would dramatically help bring bike access here and reduce our dependence on autos. And as Mark mentioned, also extending that bike path along Wilkes. I think those are two of our primary ideas. Anything else to add, Mark?
I would just say that, we're very receptive, and we really understand the need for this in the community, but we also want to be fair and make sure everybody knows that there are other avenues and other routes to take for having these kinds of discussions. So from a park standpoint, what we're looking at is designing and developing what's in the park and what's in the park boundary. And while getting to it is very important, and we agree with you, there are certainly discussions that could be had with the River Road Santa Clara planning effort that talks about, hey, let's get more of that bike access in. Let's make sure these bikeways are paved and that sort of thing. That's the bigger picture. So we're looking at this in a very focused effort on what goes in the park boundary. And so when the question starts to come in, how do we get people to the park? It's a transportation question. So I don't mean to dismiss it. I just think that, it would be good to have that same question asked in another forum where we can actually talk about it more, in a more meaningful way.
Mark, if it helps, the River Loop 2 is identified in Eugene's transportation system plan. It's a plan that looks out to the year 2035. Of course, that's not to say that a street improvement project would have to wait that long necessarily, but it's something that could be developed jointly with Wayne County if that was a high priority. And that's a key point, is prioritizing what the needs are citywide. And likely we're first looking at city facilities before we are county, but then again, it's a partnership with the multiple jurisdictions, similar to some investments that are going to be made on Hunziker Lane in future years.
Thank you, Chris. Awesome.
Will there be more surveys in the future for input on pool and community center placement, specifically swapping placement of dog park and community center? I think that when the community center and pool are ready to be designed, when they're funded and we can move forward on that project, I think we'll absolutely be doing additional community engagement. And I would say that that entire area really would be open to discussion. And so who knows, it could be that we all really get invested in the dog park to the south and agree that it should move, but there will be additional opportunities for that.
Yeah, thank you, Carolyn. And the other way to look at it too is, you know, we know that we need a bridge connection, and we're really constrained in where that can happen because of a whole bunch of underlying reasons, wetland soils and you know, those zones there, as well as where the driveway is going to come in. Typically, you put those entry drives into a parking lot directly across from another street or within a very slight offset. And you know, certainly not on a curve in the road. So I think we know a road is going to come in to whatever this is going to look like, and we know this bridge will be here, but the rest of that could look very different in the future, 10, 15 years out, when this is planned for the community center.
Okay, sorry, I was just rustling papers. This next question, what about the little strip of land along River Loop 1, part of the park? So that is a different park. We're currently calling it River Loop Park, and I was just looking up to try to find the acreage of that. I can't remember it offhand.
Actually, Carolyn?
Yeah.
I think we might be talking about this little piece right here on the map.
Oh, I
that's
bet you're
directly
right.
across from, yeah, there's the road that goes to the boat launch. And so there's this little parcel over here that's just barely wide enough to handle, say, like one-sided parking in a road. That would probably be really tough to fit that, but we've had discussions about that, and would certainly consider another crossing here, maybe a pedestrian crossing, but the size of that is currently kind of too small to start accommodating something that makes sense from a planning perspective. But it would be managed as part of the park, because it is part of the park.
Thank you, Mark. I think you're right. That's exactly what that question was. We are getting more pickleball players in wheelchairs. How far is it from the pitch or parking area, I wonder? Oh, maybe the question is, how far is it from the parking area to the pickleball courts?
Yeah, about 500 feet.
Thanks.
So, you know, this is actually pretty early on discussion with the Madison Middle School, and it was specific to courts and court sports. Basketball was the example that was used. You know, again, remember we said we didn't want to duplicate efforts, but this is where the Madison schools courts are. And so they said, hey, you know, if somebody says they want a soccer field or a baseball field, we have one here. Don't spend the park money on that. You know, but we don't have a full court basketball. So if it were located somewhere close to the school, you know, we would certainly be up to facilitating some kind of a connection so that, you know, we're not double spending those dollars, so to speak, and put things in a location that makes sense. So that's one of the reasons that we looked at this as a location, because of that proximity to the Madison Middle School.
And we have another question about the possibility of switching the community center and parking to allow the dog to the back. And I guess I think we just answered that question.
I think that was asked and answered. Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you plan to do about the added traffic on Wilkes? We already have so many people speeding up and down Wilkes all times of the day and night. I think that has also been answered unless there's anything else to add.
I think we covered that pretty well with our answers
Okay.
and with Chris's help.
And we answered that one. So what information or data would you need to see the need to increase the number of pickleball courts to at least 8?
What would we need to see?
So I think the question is, if somebody was advocating to have more pickleball courts than 4, kind of what kind of maybe survey data or argument would somebody need to put out there? And I don't know that we have an exact kind of you know, recipe for that, but I think what we're just trying to do is gauge the support for this plan and what the additional interests are. And so just through our survey data, through conversations, through this forum, and then of course we'll be looking towards our budget and what the priorities are. And so that's kind of how we're going about this. Anything to add to that, Mark?
You know, I'll look at this from a sort of reverse perspective. You know, on a previous park planning project, we heard from a group that was interested in petanque, which was a sport in the area that was underrepresented and only had kind of one area where they can do that, and really kind of targeted a specific area of Eugene based on the users that were in there. And you know, we talked about that and said, well, you know, is that something that's needed everywhere? And Mike Stasek, who's the president of the club, he said, you know, I think based on our membership, we really only have, you know, maybe one or two people in the Santa Clara area. So, you know, if we had interest there, we would certainly help that group talk to you and build some support for that. But we really see it as a need that's driven by the people that live in the area, because that's kind of where that community level services. Doesn't mean we can't drive to a community park across town, but we have to first answer the needs within that community. And so we'll do that for Santa Clara first, and then look at those other possibilities.
When will the bike path be connected to Wilkes Drive? Will it connect to the park?
So the bike path, I would expect that in phase 1, we probably would not make this connection to the north part of the park, just because what that begins to trigger from a design perspective. But we're not preset on that. In other words, we have a pretty difficult and arduous task of doing a cost estimate for all of this from both a master plan perspective as well as a phasing perspective. And the thing to remember is, if you had X dollars and were to build it all now, that's actually probably the most economical, because you're doing it at the same time, contractors out once, etc. When we start putting in parts and pieces here, we like to group all those pieces together. That's the most cost effective from a phasing standpoint. So for example, we would try to concentrate all of our dollars, you know, in and around the playground area, for example, and restroom and schoolhouse, and, you know, then start moving out towards the bridge and the dog park. But, you know, now that I say that out loud, something like a dog park is does not have the big demand and stress on infrastructure. For example, you know, a restroom building needs plumbing, it needs electricity. That's where we're going to house all of our circuits for potential events and that sort of thing. So, you know, that has a lot more need versus something that's more of a low use, like a dog park or the path itself. So it's a possibility, but we're not there.
You know, I'm recognizing that, you know, again, it's difficult without the give and take here, but I'm wondering if the bike path that's being referred to here is the one coming up from the south, from Beaver Hunsaker, or perhaps even the one that is currently along Wilkes. I'm not sure, but Chris Henry, do we have a date when we think the Hunsaker Beaver path is going to be constructed? Do we know that yet?
I do not know, but that's some information that we can get to post on the Engage Eugene site. Because you're going to save these questions and answers, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So we can get a clearer answer for that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
I hope we answered that question in one way, shape, or form. River Loop 2 is a drag strip at various times and will need to have a means to slow down traffic. So another vote for some traffic calming there. I missed the first 30 minutes, so this may have already been answered, but I'm wondering about improvements for pedestrians to get to these new areas. On Wilkes after Madison Middle School, the road is very narrow and there's a lot of traffic. So I think, Mark, do you want to just summarize that again?
Yeah, I think we did answer that, but you know, when we do a park, we certainly look at the immediate park frontage and put in fact, you know, here we're already showing the detached boulevard tree planting and sidewalk that would connect this side of the park to this side of the park. But once we move east and west of that, we end up in a different jurisdiction. So there are some county roads here. And so the same thing happens on the south. And in fact, here, it's even a little bit more different just because we're at this funny intersection. So that's going to take a little coordination with Lane County. And, you know, I suspect that the piece that would eventually connect to where the bike path ends here right now, that's probably, I would say, the last in the order of the ones that would be put together, just because that would have something to do with the Wilkes Drive, any Wilkes Drive development that happens. And again, that's a county road, so we can't really answer that online live with too much certainty.
Thank you. And what about squash courts for the winter? I'm not familiar with squash. I guess it can be played in the winter.
I guess so. There's the first suggestion for squash. So again, just as with skateboarding and skate spots, we need to hear from you. So in number. Thank you.
So here's another comment about pickleball. It's the fastest growing sport in the country, and the location of the courts in the draft plan is shown near the school, which is great because it would make the courts easy for students and physical education classes. The courts will be well used, so well used, in fact, that it would be smart and desirable to have 8 to 12 courts built in the park to accommodate that number of users. It seems like there is ample space in the general area of the pickleball courts to have 8 to 12 courts. If there were more pickleball courts constructed, do you think they can fit in the general area where they are shown now?
Could they fit? Certainly, they could fit in there. I think then we start affecting the balance of court sports and natural areas. And this is where, you know, again, we would look to the survey and say what's most important for the community in Santa Clara. And a lot of it had to do with preserving that natural character and feel of the natural areas, which are pretty fixed, you know, along these oxbows and edges. Certainly this edge here next to the middle school, that's probably, you know, that's one of the reasons why we focus there for some of our court sports. So could it fit there? Yes. Is there a demand and need for that? I think that would need to be demonstrated. And we need to hear about that in the surveys as well. And again, with the prioritization for Santa Clara versus all of Eugene.
Okay, so perhaps a very...
Actually, one more, Carolyn. I think because a lot of these questions I'm seeing are very similar to what we heard on our last big park design, which shall go unnamed, which was fun and still fun. And I think we talked about Golden Gardens as the potential spot for a real, what was the level that's called, where you actually have tournaments there, and we're looking at, you know, a large number of banked types of court sports that can accommodate that, both because of the size of the park and the location versus looking at this, which is, you know, 35 acres is right on the cusp of just big enough to do a community park.
Okay. Perhaps a very small financial allocation by the city towards the schoolhouse project would make a huge difference for our community in having a gathering place for the next 15 plus years. any chance now for such a shift, however small? Maybe I'll answer that one. You know, from the beginning, we were pretty clear that the city didn't want to have ongoing responsibility of the schoolhouse because we really want to focus our efforts on providing the future community center and also providing this community park. And so because of that, we really have not talked about supporting the schoolhouse in any way. I think it's not something that we've talked about with the Santa Clara Community Organization, but we could talk. Again, it is just a matter of priorities and identifying where the community believes that they are most needed. So I guess it's not out of the question, but we would have to understand kind of the pros and cons and the give and take of that discussion. So it's possible. Okay. When will the temporary dog park be available for use?
If it's something that's identified in the phase 1 construction, then our construction for the park, the $4 million of features that would be designed in that phase would happen sometime between 2022 and 2023. We would basically use the next year for doing all the design drawings for that. So if the dog park, the interim dog park, is part of that phase 1, then it would be in that time frame.
And where are the restrooms in this area? Mark, could you maybe show the
Sure.
restrooms?
The restroom building is this little blue building right here. The gray one that's above it, that's actually an existing garage. So that is a leftover from the schoolhouses up here. There were 3 residential properties that had these really long lots moving north to south. So this one was actually part of this property. The schoolhouse was the middle, and then there was another one here. Sorry, now I'm going off on a tangent, but I'm going to finish because this, if you go out there right now, you'll actually see a gravel driveway that does this loop. You'll see the 2 driveway entrances for what used to be a homestead here. And, you know, we're kind of looking at that as already impacted, and it makes sense, and it's a low volume. So, you know, people can visualize that. We're working around our existing trees. So, sorry, short answer, the restroom is right here next to the existing garage building, which we would use for maintenance, storage, and other features that are being programmed right now.
Next question. The community lacks covered basketball courts. This being Oregon, it would be great to see this option seriously considered.
Okay, well, it could certainly be considered. I think for us, it would be a first to actually see what it would cost to do something like that. I do know that when we start looking at group shelters on this scale, that's kind of the high end of what we look at for covering and open space. These are sort of what I think of as there has to be a real demonstrated need, and there has to be the ability to rent those facilities out. So if you kind of look at those 2 sizes there in those group shelters, this is probably about 3 times that. So this would not be a small undertaking, but we can discuss it.
Yeah, definitely understand the need. That right now we currently offer that at Washington Jefferson Park. Under the bridge there is the only covered outdoor basketball courts we have. Okay, so there was, I don't know if we answered this, but I think the question was around, could the dog park stay in the interim location? I think that, again, we will be doing additional planning and outreach when we have the money to move forward with the community center and pool. And so I think that, you know, whether or not it stays in that interim location could be discussed at that time. So not off the table.
And just to speak on behalf of our recreation services, because we did talk about this early on, is when we talk about interim features, there are those that sort of get developed and everybody will fall in love with them. So for example, if that were an interim dog parking area, it would likely not have the permanent shade trees that it would if it went up on the north end, because we know that it's essentially an area that would be completely redone when the community center comes in. And so the funding and the dollars that go into the interim would have to be respent again to move it up to the north. So the idea of sort of keeping it there permanently and then locking us into that really starts to affect what we can do with that future community center. And that's really, you know, that's the important part. We're dedicating this site for that community center and pool, and we don't want to let the tail wag the dog, so to speak.
Is there any landscape in Santa Clara that would be conducive to mountain bike trails, similar to Thurston Hills in Springfield or Ridgeline in South Eugene? You know, if Philip is able to unmute himself, I wonder if this would be a good question.
Yeah, I'm here.
Awesome.
Let's see, Carly, maybe, I don't know if you need my video or not, but I can undo that too. I actually I read that question ahead of time and was looking at the landscape, and I have on my screen kind of the LiDAR imagery. It's really flat up here in the north, and it's just not really comparable at all to what this fellow mentions, or this person, could be a woman. At Thurston Hills and the Ridgeline, there's just a lot of elevation difference. Now, that's not to say you can't do mountain biking. I mean, a lot of parts of the country, they're relatively flat and do have courses. I think the real issue here is the land that the city has available. We don't have a lot in the north yet, and a lot of, I think something maybe like a pump track or a small skills piece is something that we could conceivably do, but you know, longer trails, we just don't really have the ownership right now. I mean, maybe in the future, that's certainly my hope. But right now I'd say no. And I'd be happy to talk with this person later. Feel free to email me and we can communicate about that.
Thank you, Philip. Here's a comment. I would love to see a pond with ducks. Kids and families always love a beautiful water setting. I think that I started misanswering the question earlier by thinking someone was referring to some of the river frontage that we've recently purchased off of River Loop 1, but we do have a natural area park up there that does have an oxbow of the Willamette along there, and so one day that will be more of a natural area park, but with trails and you know, visibility to the water, and I'm thinking that would be best served there where we actually have some water. Will there be any information provided in the park to tell about the history of this property?
Well,
Mark or Emily?
We certainly could tell the history of the property and the site. I think it would take some input from the community for that.
Yeah.
We did, I do believe, have a survey question that asked about interpretation and public art and things along that nature, and so that did rank in the priorities. So it is captured, and I certainly see how that could help tell the story. I mean, we're certainly telling the story by looking at both the natural areas and the grid of trees here. So it would be fun to be able to tell that story in some way. It doesn't have to be a big, you know, expensive actual feature within the park, but that interpretation can be overlaid and, you know, knitted throughout the story of the park in sort of small ways and in artistic ways within, you know, the walls that we're already putting on the playground, or the, you know, the areas around the courts, or the shelters. And Emily looks like she's got some great input to give to here.
Oh, well, I just wanted to add that, you know, we've been doing this to some greater or lesser extent throughout parks, I think, for the last 20 years. And as we're going forward, I'm the manager of the Downtown Riverfront Park project, where we're doing that very intentionally. I mean, I don't expect that we'll do that at that level at each site, but I think, you know, I think there's kind of a new appreciation for our local community's history. I think that people are really curious about it. I think there's an extraordinary opportunity with the schoolhouse and the community garden to tell some really, you know, important stories about this area and maybe how it was settled and maybe about people who lived here before. And, you know, I don't know, there's a lot of stories I think that are ingrained in every site. And so how we bring those to light, I think, is a really collaborative effort with the community. And so it's a big opportunity. So I think it can be really an important component of any park that we build. And I would even venture to say that it might be a priority to do that at this site.
And, you know, the other opportunity that we have, even though it's in the distant future, is the community center. So, you know, a lot of times that kind of story and interpretation can be done in a much, you know, richer and robust and sort of interactive way inside a facility. So it doesn't mean that, you know, if we don't do a little bit of it now, that we can't even do more in the future in the building.
Okay, how will the park be lit? LED, shielded to prevent light pollution?
Yes, best question all night. So the question LED, you know, LED is a new technology, and you know, it's low cost. The shielding question is certainly something that we do in all of our parks. We're concerned about whether or not there is light trespass both to the sky and to adjacent users. And so the lighting that we showed is, again, also a placeholder, because that has to be done in context of what trees are we putting there, how big are the buildings next to it, where's, you know, how far is it a 12-foot pole or a 16, etc. And so, you know, that's a whole design process in itself, and it doesn't really happen at the concept level. That will happen throughout the course of next year, but we will start to show you where some of those lights might start ending up. And we do look at shielding, and we do look at LED and temperature as well. You know, if it's a protected resource, then we start looking at the temperature of the lights so that we can better address what nature and wildlife you know, are there, and not disrupt their habitat.
And Mark, while we're talking lighting, will the pickleball and tennis courts have lighting for evening play?
I can say they probably will not. That's the kind of thing that's really targeted for a bigger size park. You know, for a park of this size and scale, if we start talking about doing night lighting, then I think we're almost needing then to start thinking about pickleball, if we're going to use that example, as an 8 to 12 pickleball court. And then, you know, we probably need twice that amount of parking just to handle that for the events. And then my guess is we probably wouldn't have much budget for some of the other features in the playground. But, you know, the night lighting really does start to impact neighbors. It's in a decent spot because it's next to the middle school, so I guess it's not completely discounted. But you know, typically for a park this size, we're not going to look at night lighting for those court sports.
And it is potentially something that could be added later.
Yeah, certainly can.
Here's a question, I think, for Chris. I have heard that Lane County has transferred ownership maintenance of roads to the city in the past. I imagine city staff will look into that, as it makes more sense to have a cohesive sidewalk and bike path. That way it's not dependent on separate budgets.
So I have some good news. I'll get to that, answering that question, but there are several questions that came up around traffic calming and the jurisdiction issue and the path. And since this meeting has been going on, I did some digging around, and I found the funding for the path that connects from Beaver Hunsaker up to Wilkes. And it's not all path, some of it's on the existing street network. That is funded at a little over $2 million and anticipated to be completed in the year 2025. Now that's 5 years away, so there's no guarantee that that will remain on schedule. I'm not saying it should or shouldn't, but that's 5 years out. But the funding was identified for that path connection to be made. And it's a combination of local funds of a little over $500,000 and a little over $1.5 million in congestion mitigation and air quality funds. So that helps answer the question of when and how do we make that connection. Now, the other part of the questions here are about jurisdiction and transfers between the county and the city. In the city, there is a transfer that happens, but usually only when the street has been improved to urban standards. A street that has sidewalks and a drainage system and an engineered road bed. And that takes money to do. So the city would not accept either River Route 2 or Wilkes Drive from Lane County until those improvements were made and investments in a safe and accessible street. But that's also an example of Beaver and Hunziker. And there's a project identified to do, well, there's funding for a design, but not for construction yet. And when that is constructed, a new Hunziker Lane, then that would likely transfer over to the city for ongoing maintenance and jurisdiction. I think that answers all those transportation questions other than traffic calming. And that's something that people can talk to Lane County about today. You don't have to worry, you don't have to wait until sometime in the future. It's something you can ask them about now.
Chris, I'm going to keep you on the line here because our next question is wondering about a safe designated crossing at River Road and Wilkes Drive.
Right, and so I'm looking at that on the map too, and that's a signalized intersection.
Okay.
So it has traffic signals, pedestrian signals, marked crosswalks. Could something be done there? Perhaps. There's bike lanes, at least on River Road, and to the west on Irvington Drive. And then the county has a side path on the north side of Wilkes. I'm not sure exactly what is perceived as unsafe there, but that's something that could be looked at. It'd be helpful to have a little more information about what the concerns are there.
Thanks, Chris. The covered basketball court could also be used as a covered community market space. We discussed in the last meeting an interest in having a location for a farmer's market in the area to support local ag. Could do a twofer. Mark, do you want to point out on the screen the area we were thinking for a possible community farmer's market?
Yes, Carolyn, that's up here. It's between the parking lot and the schoolhouse and restroom. So it's this space. It currently shows a grid of trees in tree wells with tree grates. So it's essentially a fully paved space in here. It is not a covered space. I understand the context of the question. Hey, you could use that for both. However, that would mean then taking the court sport use and overlaying that with something that's more of a passive use, flexible event space and market and schoolhouse and community garden. And those two are a little bit in conflict. So yeah, I could see how that's a two for use if those underlying uses were more compatible, but I don't think they are in this case.
Let's see, I think this is the last question. What will be park regulations for hours of use? How will overnight camping be handled? I think all our parks close at 11 o'clock every night. And can somebody help me out? What time do they open in the morning?
6 o'clock in the morning. And we had a very similar question, and we talked about the potential of adding a gate at the parking lot, which, we do sometimes, right off the get-go or afterwards if it becomes a problem area so that people aren't parking in the park all night. And again, we have 2 parks dedicated parks policemen that are in charge of all of our parks, so they answer all those calls. And once this is annexed and developed as a park, then once it's annexed, then they will answer those calls, as well as our park ambassadors that do a lot of that outreach in our parks.
Okay, and I do believe that is it for the questions. That was a lot.
It was a lot. And I just had a thought here, because we did have a lot of transportation related questions, and we are trying to go above and beyond as an organization. So within you know, as a city organization, we want to be all inclusive. And I think, you know, from this park design standpoint, we are, you know, we are parks planners and park designers. So that's why we invited Chris here, and he graciously accepted and was able to join us. But, you know, a lot of these questions really start to, you know, get at those transportation needs, which while they're related to and tied to increased use from the park, we understand that there are also other avenues too. And so I think maybe we'll post some additional information and contacts on who you might be able to get in touch with to get more information on the transportation components.
Okay, and actually we just had one more sneak in. Will there be a neighborhood park watch program that nearby residents could volunteer for? I'm wondering if Alyssa could speak to that, or Emily or Jesse. I know that we have a park watch program, but it's not necessarily something people volunteer for, or maybe Michelle.
I can handle that one,
Awesome,
Carolyn.
thank you.
Yeah, so we don't currently have within the volunteer program, have a neighborhood watch program per se. I know EPD does. I don't know what the details are on that because that's run through the police department. So I believe it was Andy that answered this question. So they may want to contact the EPD and find out what I know they have volunteers for them as well. But we do have the Park Watch app that anybody can go in and there you can use your smartphone and go online and you can put a request in or concern in. And it immediately goes directly into our system, and the park ambassadors review it. And if it's something that they need, that they feel like they can address, they will address it, or they will, or get EPD involved, or cahoots, or maybe even send it to non-emergency or 911. They have different protocols based on what it is for. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Michelle.
And I'll just add the web address to input any concerns that you have about the park is just eugene-or.gov/parkwatch. So it's the main city address /parkwatch.
Thanks, Alyssa.
Thanks, Alyssa.
Okay, we have about 8 minutes left. I think we're right on time, Mark.
I think so. So before we wrap up, I just want to tell everybody about next steps. We do have another small survey to come out here online live, so don't hang up quite yet. And then we'll have, you know, this final poll to get your feedback. So coming up on Tuesday, September 1st, I will be available in a similar setting like this, a drop-in Zoom meeting. So this is an additional opportunity to ask questions and provide feedback. Very new for us. Today was very new for us, so bear with us. We just wanted to put as many opportunities for outreach out there as possible since we couldn't meet in person. We will send those meeting links out soon. Check Engage Eugene and sign up. We do have one more meeting, likely in October. This will include the final master plan as well as an identified map of what the phase 1 improvements are going to be for our budget. The third and final survey will be launched around the time of that final master plan, and that'll be your opportunity to provide some feedback on that and on the phase 1 priorities. So our next year following that is going to be taken up mainly with construction documentation for phase 1, engineering, surveying, those sorts of things, and the construction will begin in 2022 or 2023. So I think we have another poll.
We do. Before I launch that, we have another question for the link to the or the web address for the survey, and we actually have that right here.
There it is. So engage.eugene-or.gov/Santa Clara Park.
And I will launch the poll now.
Okay. Votes are still trickling in. We should have music to play in the background. What do you think? Somebody had that idea. I think Rex had that idea. Couldn't pull it off.
I'll just take this opportunity to pop in and say that I believe everyone put in their email addresses when they registered to join this. So we will certainly be sending out a link to the survey. So just watch your email and we'll get you that link so you can easily access it.
Thank you. And you can also take the survey in Spanish. So let's end our polling here and share some results. So what do we think of this virtual workshop format? 89% like it. Some would rather meet in person. That's pretty good.
Are you sharing the results, Mark?
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not. I'm making them up. No, here we go. We have 89% that really like the virtual workshop format. In person, certainly once that's available and allowed by the state and the county, then we would certainly love to meet in person as well. And will you participate in the online survey? People either already have or plan to, so that's great. We really want to hear from everybody. And if you don't know,
sorry, go on.
and if you don't know how, so again, here on this page, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing these results. And say, you know, the Engage Eugene website is engage.eugene-or.gov/Santa Clara Park. From there, there is a link for the survey. You simply click and it will begin asking you questions. You can find other information there, links to old surveys, plans and schedules, a recording of the workshop, probably tomorrow sometime, and signing up for project updates. This is me, Mark Cosmos. My phone number, 541-682-4902, or my email, mcosmos@eugene-or.gov. You can contact me if you have questions during regular work hours. And I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. And thank our panelists for staying up late, for answering some difficult questions for sure, and for the questions that we were not able to answer in full. We will certainly post something on Engage and do a little bit more research. So thanks everybody, and look forward to seeing you again soon.